Good. Good afternoon, everyone. The Planning Commission is in session. Ms. Rodriguez, would you take attendance, please?
Here.
Here. Commissioner Jordan?
Here.
Commissioner Higgins?
Here.
Vice Chair Campanella?
Here.
Chair Thompson?
Here. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the
Any
agenda.
announcements?
Yes, I would just like to make an announcement for benefit of anyone interested in the viewing public that you have a special meeting of the Planning Commission next Thursday, June 25th, and we'll be having a Planning Commission workshop on amendments to the new zoning ordinance, and it's an opportunity for the public to come in and weigh in and review possible changes on land uses to the zoning ordinance. The open house begins at 1:30 in the David Gebhardt Public Meeting Room, with the actual workshop beginning at 3 o'clock, and anyone is welcome.
Okay, thank you. Next item is the minutes and resolutions from the June 4th meeting that were sent out electronically earlier this week. Does anybody have any recommended changes, corrections, comments? Commissioner
make
Schwartz.
a motion to
Commissioner Schwartz says.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
have one question on page 3. This is under the operations plan, item number 7. I wanted to ask Ms. Galarte, this sentence that reads, the rear door shall be controlled for emergency use, etc. The word controlled, I wasn't recalling from our hearing that we either used that word or we defined the control of the emergency use of that door. We had some back and forth conversation about the door handle and ingress, egress, and so forth. Could we clarify that, Ms. Galarte?
Well, the intent of that was just that the only reason that door really would be used is in an emergency and for trash. So we can remove the word controlled, but...
And it was emergency egress.
Emergency
that was,
egress.
I think, the very
Correct.
specific. So I'm not sure if my colleagues want to include the word egress, but it's not emergency. There's no ingress.
Correct.
Except, although there is qualified by saying, but may be used for trash disposal as needed, which then could be both ingress and egress. So I don't know how my colleagues would like to resolve that. I just think we need to clear up that one item. Thank you.
Do you want to propose a wording change?
I don't know, Ms. Galarte, if
I'm
you...
sorry, what page was it? I'm just...
Oh, this is on page 3 of the resolution, under operations plan. So this is B7. The rear door shall be controlled for emergency use only, comma, but may be used for trash disposal as needed.
I'm getting a copy now.
Okay. Rear door shall be controlled. Do we need to have the word controlled in there? I guess that's one of my questions. I don't know if my colleagues have an opinion. The rear door shall be used for egress
Emergency use only, but may be used for trash disposal as needed.
Would that
Yes.
suffice? Yes, I'm seeing a nod yes, and I think, Ms. Lodge, you were going to be the maker of the motion. How does that suit you?
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there
I'll
a second?
I'll second
Motion
that.
and second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. Did the motion also include the resolution?
Yes, sorry about that, yes.
Okay, just for clarification, the motion included the minutes and the resolution. Okay, next item on the agenda is the application for 340 East Olivo Street. Susanna, you giving the report? Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Thompson and Planning Commissioners. The project at 340 East Los Olivos is located at the corner of Laguna and East Los Olivos Street. Whoops, sorry. I guess the noise is on, indicated by the star here. The project, I don't know why it's going so fast. Project will result in a net increase of 437 square feet. It's to permit as-built additions and alterations to the existing residence and accessory structure, demolish a garage loft space, and dismantle, relocate, and enlarge the existing garage, install a new driveway with vehicular turntable, and maintain and protect the 1820 Mission Aqueduct location and remnant that was on the site. The discretionary applications before the commission today are 2 front setback modifications, an interior setback modification, and a net floor area modification. Most modifications are in the purview of the staff hearing officer. The reason why this is before the Planning Commission today is because it is requesting a net floor area modification or an FAR modification. The findings for that FAR mod include that the fact that 6 HLC members voted in support of the project. The lot has unique conditions that apply to it that generally don't apply to other lots in the neighborhood, and neighborhood compatibility. To give you a little history of the site, the house was constructed in 1911. The garage was constructed in 1916. And the property is eligible for designation as a city landmark, for listing on the California Register of Historical Resources, and for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. The city's first zoning standards for residential buildings were adopted in 1924. This aerial image is from 1928 and demonstrates the location of the residence as well as the accessory building. At that time of the adoption in 1924, the maximum building height was limited to 2.5 stories in this location, or 2 stories with a finished attic with a height limit of 35 feet. And it was conforming to that. In 1930, the property was downzoned to R1, one family residential zone. This is a 1931 Sanborn map that does show the location of the garage in the northwest corner, the dwelling, as well as the accessory building. There was a subdivision done in 1954. The lot was originally 27,000 plus square feet. It was subdivided in 1954, so you see the resulting map on the right, to the current size and configuration of the lot. Following that, this is a photo from sometime between 1945 and 1955. The property was downzoned again in 1957 to E2 for the second time that was downzoned. And then finally in 1975, it was downzoned to E1, which is the current zoning designation for the lot, having a minimum lot size of 15,000 square feet. So at that time, this lot became non-conforming to the minimum lot size. With each of the downzonings, the zoning standards for residential development became more restrictive. For example, the minimum lot size increased and the required setbacks increased. This is the site plan for reference. North is at the bottom of your screen, where East Los Olivos Street is, and the left side of your screen would be Laguna. The blue lines that I have indicated on the site plan here are where the required setbacks are. So this is the 30-foot setback along Laguna Street, the 30-foot setback from East Los Olivos Street, and a 10-foot interior setback from the westerly property line. The proposal includes as-built additions and alterations to the accessory building that are indicated in red here. The accessory building encroaches 5 feet into the front setback along East Los Olivos Street, and the entire accessory building is located in the 30-foot setback off Laguna Street. The original garage that is existing today is located entirely within the front setback. The proposal includes relocating that garage outside of the required setback, enlarging it so that we have a minimum interior dimension of 20 feet in width, and would require an interior setback modification for the encroachment up to 4 foot 1 inches from that westerly property line. There are also, the reason for the expansion to the west is that the applicant is proposing to avoid this easement that's shown in blue that is for the historic location of the Mission Aqueduct and preserving the remaining portion of the aqueduct that is on site. It also had to do with spatial relationship between the residence and the garage. There were as-built additions and alterations to the southwest corner of the residence, which are on the second floor. They have enclosed this existing sunroom by inserting windows into openings that were formerly open to the elements. And then on the third floor, they had done a as-built dormer addition and a third floor balcony. All these as-built changes were completed prior to the current owner taking ownership of the property in 2013. These are the north and east elevations that would front East Los Olivos and Laguna Streets. The south elevation is where one of the elevations that you would see the location of the second-story enclosure and the third-story dormer in this location. And on the west elevation, you would also see that third-story dormer addition and the enclosure. So here's back to that 1945, 1955 photo. You can see the dormer addition does not exist. There is a shed roof over the second-story screen porch area, and the studio's over here in the corner, the accessory building. This is a current photo, or semi-current photo from 2012 from Bing Maps, that you can see the dormer addition here with the third-story balcony. There are now windows in that second-story sleeping porch area and the accessory building in the upper right-hand corner. And then, of course, the aerial imagery at the bottom shows the neighborhood context. Many of these buildings, you can see, are much closer than the required 30-foot front setback within that zone. Specific alterations that we'll be permitting are the removal of a shower within the accessory building, removal of a kitchen sink in the accessory building. These were disclosed in the 2013 zoning information report that was prepared at the time of the sale. The original structure, dating back to the 1930s and recorded, the county assessor, tax assessor, indicated on their detail report, was 167 square feet, which is the bright blue line, and then the dashed area was a fenced-in area, approximately 120 square feet, which was later enclosed, with 5 feet of that being in the front setback off of East Los Olivos Street. So the proposed configuration is at the right. So in the location of the shower, they would have storage shelves and no kitchen sink in this area. Staff has proposed that a condition be recorded for a zoning compliance declaration due to the past history of use of this as a second unit. These are the elevations of the accessory building. The garage floor plan exists currently with only a 17-foot 5-inch interior width. That is why they're doing the 2'7" addition that is shown here on the right to get that 20-foot interior width. And as a result, in order to maintain the roof pitch, they will be increasing the height by approximately 8 inches. Floor to lot area ratios are required on lots that have less than 15,000 square feet. So this lot has 13,510 square feet, so it is a required FAR. Modifications are needed for this property because the FAR is over 85% and the height exceeds 25 feet, and also because the FAR is greater than 100% of the maximum FAR requirement. The permitted residence from grade to ridge is 32 feet, and the addition proposed, the dormer at the very top of the roof of that, it would be 30 feet. And like I stated before, the proposed net increase is 437 square feet, or 9% over the existing floor area. The HLC reviewed the project on October 8th. It was a unanimous decision to forward this on to Planning Commission. The project they felt was ready for project design approval. They stated their support of the requested modifications, and they particularly stated with respect to the FAR modification that this addition is not adding size, bulk, and scale to any of the sides of the historic house, and that the compatibility and analysis criteria had generally been met. The applicant did provide the 20 closest homes analysis, and these are the lots that were used for that analysis. You can see there are a number of lots in this area that are quite a bit smaller than the subject lot. When you count all the 20 closest homes, this would have the fourth largest FAR. Sorry. And then when you look at lots that are 10,000 square feet, and it should say 10,000 square feet or greater, the analysis points that this is the largest FAR. However, it's similar in size to other developments within the neighborhood on similarly sized lots. As part of the environmental review for the project, there was a Phase 1 Historic Structures and Sites report done. At the conclusion of that report, that the project as proposed will have a less than significant impact on the historic resource, as well as the Phase 1 archaeological report concluded that the project as proposed, which does include future protection with that no build easement across the property, arc monitoring proposed by the applicant during the relocation of the garage, that the project would have a less than significant impact on any archaeological resources. With that, staff is using the CEQA exemption 15301 and 15305 for additions to existing facilities and minor alterations and land use limitations. And I had a few recommended changes to conditions of approval that I handed out previously. Condition B5, I stated should be deleted because there is not a landscape plan. One was not reviewed, nor was it required by the Historic Landmarks Commission. Condition D2F has been simplified to eliminate the need for a structural engineer to prepare a report to evaluate the reuse of the one-story building. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the project making the findings as outlined in Section X of your staff report. Those are on pages 8 and 9 of your staff report and subject to the conditions of the approval in the revised Exhibit A that was distributed. And I can turn it over to the applicant for any additional comments or questions they have if you would like.
Okay, thank you. Does the applicant have a presentation? Ms. Allen?
Thank you. Trish Allen with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting. Ms. Riegel very much covered all the details of this project. And some of my slides do overlap hers, but I'll just move through them very quickly. Just do want to underscore a couple of points made by staff. And hopefully I can get this to work. We have the similar aerials. I like to look at this. I like to look at old aerials. And I think what's interesting about this is really the development that exists on East Los Olivos and Junipero Plaza, the large 4 lots, through lots in this neighborhood. And here's a zoom in, similar to Ms. Riegel's, showing the subject property here. And you do note the roof line of the accessory structure. And just photos of the house. The west side. The east facing Laguna Street. It's not an easy house to take photos of. You can't quite get everything in the frame. There's the back side of the house showing the second floor sunroom enclosure. And one point there, just to elaborate on what Ms. Riegel mentioned, it's sort of a technicality because the sunroom, of course, existed. It was a screened-in porch with some awnings that did protect it from the weather. And at some point in time, the glass was added into the screened area. It is considered an addition because of how the zoning ordinance defines the habitable space. So that is called an addition, although it was there, and it is, it doesn't really change the mass, bulk, and scale of the home. And here's a shot of the accessory structure with Los Olivos behind. And just to provide, we have very similar slides. Hers are better. A little bit of background, when Mr. Nguyen first contacted our office to assist with the planning process, he did inherit some of these violations, as stated. So the zoning report was prepared in 2013. It identified some of these violations, and of course we're addressing those with the project. But really the owners, Alistair Nguyen and Ann Nguyen are here behind me, primarily wanted to really create a functional garage, a garage where they could park 2 vehicles. And what was really important to them was to have safe ingress and egress from that garage. And we did explore a lot of different site layouts at the time with staff that have culminated into the project that you're reviewing today. So we had different, we looked at providing the parking on the other side of the property off of Laguna Street. So we looked at a lot of different options. And I think my main point about that is that it was so important when you have a property that has these significant cultural resources historically and with the archaeology, is to work closely with those consultants to develop what the proposed scope is. The idea is to avoid any potential to infect the cultural resources or minimize to the extent feasible. And that's what this project is. So that's why all these measures or recommended actions are part of our project scope. For example, the inclusion of the aqueduct easement going all the way through the property. That is something that we built in and then directed us in terms of where to site the garage. And so I just wanted to point that out to you, that was absolutely intentional. Again, this is a little bit different than Ms. Riegel's slide, because what I've showed here are the structures that are legally permitted that currently encroach into today's required setbacks, and you understand all the downzoning that staff went through. I just thought it was important to point that out. And this slide shows the proposed encroachments as part of this project. Again, the FAR mod did require a supermajority vote by the Historic Landmarks Commission. It was unanimous. They thanked Mr. Wynn and Mrs. Wynn for their careful attention to preserving this really important historic resource. Without the as-built additions, as the staff report states, the FAR would be 138% of the maximum FAR for this size lot. And again, the project with these proposed additions represents a 9% increase of that. Back to this, the garage, the existing garage is about 7 feet from the front property line and about 6 feet 8 inches from the interior property line. And when we relocate it, we will be meeting the front setback, providing a turntable so it can turn the car around and exit the site with total, maximum visibility. It's such a busy area, as you know. With the relocation to meet that front setback, we are asking for a modification to move the garage a little bit closer to this shared property line right here. As Ms. Riegel stated, there are a couple, we're dealing with some site constraints in terms of staying away from the aqueduct easement, as well as trying to maintain that spatial relationship between the house and the garage. That was important to the architectural historians who are also here, in case you have any questions of them. And I meant to mention that the architect, Mark Shelnut, is also here if you have any questions for him. So up on top is the existing north elevation of the garage. It shows a height of 16 feet to the top, to the ridge. And then the proposed garage, which is being widened to about 2.5 feet to accommodate those two cars and meet current standards for the interior. And to note that the height increase is pretty subtle. It's about 8 inches. And also, I think you may have observed this when we were out at the site visit as well. The property slopes down in two directions. So as you go from Los Olivos Street and move the garage towards the south, if you will, reference south, the grade is dropping a little bit. So I think that even though the height measured from that point is 16 feet 8 inches, it'll be a little bit lower, maybe about the same height as the garage today, if that makes sense. You have to look at it in cross-section. Again, the justifications for those mods are really safety is our primary request to get this garage so it's functional and accessible and safe, and to avoid those site constraints. I know I wanted to say something else about that, but it'll come to me. Ms. Riegel mentioned the county assessor's building record. This does show the footprint of the accessory structure and the studio. I know it's hard to read here, 10 by 14. And then this area here shows a fence that is enclosing that area. So I think it's important to note that there has been structure there. This is dated 1971. I'm not even sure when the city started requiring a permit for this type of structure. Might be 75, but I'm guessing at that. And interestingly, when I was going back through my file, I noticed that the previous owner did go through a permit process to re-roof this structure in 2002. And so a permit was obtained to make that improvement on this structure. At the site visit, Commissioner Jordan did ask if we could find some examples in the neighborhood of existing accessory structures that currently encroach into setbacks. Again, this type of condition exists all over the city with these older homes and with the various downzoning actions that the city took. So I'm not picking on anyone. I just did an aerial similar to Ms. Riegel and just found a couple of examples. I didn't have to go far. So this is facing East Los Olivos Street, right next door to Mr. Wynn's residence. And this is some type of accessory structure. I did not look up the permit history on this. This is on the adjacent property at which is addressed 333 Unipro Plaza, but that is facing East Los Olivos. And then the property boundary is right about there where you see the split in the building, and that's the garage to serve the next property down on East Los Olivos at 316. And then up here, this is the little maps thing that the city, a little feature that you can do from the city's GIS mapping, and it shows building footprints, approximate locations, and then property boundaries. So I put that in there so you can orient the photo. This is down the street at address 1936 Laguna, although this structure is facing Montgomery Street. Again, some kind of garage. I don't know if this is used as a garage. I mean, obviously we see a driveway apron, but when you see the area, the topo map up here, that's the footprint of this structure here. And I believe this looks like some residential use right there. This is right across from Roosevelt School. The address is 2015 Laguna. It's at the corner of Mission and Laguna. And I did not go to the site, but what I could observe in looking at the topo and the maps system is this roof line here. I don't know that it's enclosed, but it is some sort of accessory structure. You could see the red tile roof right there behind the tall wall. So just wanted to provide you with those examples. And we're just really here for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the commission for staff or the applicant at this point? Commissioner Higgins.
Mr. Chair, I forgot to disclose I did conduct a site visit with the applicant last night. Dreaded ex parte. Sorry about that. I do have a question for the applicant about the garage. It's my understanding that moving the garage is not necessarily an action that would make the project compliant or consistent or correct a deficiency in the ZIR.
Commissioner Thompson, that's correct. This is a voluntary measure. And might I add on that if we just relocated it and met the front setback, that relocation, if we kept that line of the interior yard setback that's there now, that would also trigger a zoning modification just by moving the structure back.
So I get, excuse me, I didn't see in the HLC minutes, but was that an aspect of the project that they were enthusiastic about? Usually pulling garages off the street it can be a positive benefit to the streetscape just to move vehicle activity right, away from the sidewalk. So they didn't have a strong feeling about that either way, it sounds like?
Chair Thompson, to answer Commissioner Higgins' question, I think it was more the opposite. I was pleased that the HLC didn't have an issue with relocating a historic building and meeting current guidelines. I think they understood our purpose and our goal to address safety, but they weren't. I don't recall that point.
Okay.
I don't know if the rest of my team that was there does.
Question for staff in the staff report, section 1A, front setback modifications, third paragraph, which is third and fourth paragraphs. Really, I guess I'm just trying to understand what's being said in the fourth paragraph there that starts with the sentence, the majority of the accessory building is screened from view by the existing hedges along both property frontages. And ends with a kind of a little bit of a difficult sentence for me to follow. What is meant by the proposed setback modifications to allow additions and alterations to the accessory building within the setback are necessary to construct an appropriate improvement on the lot. You're saying it's an appropriate.
So what was trying to be conveyed in that paragraph was that the historic accessory building had a roof. Let me go back to my PowerPoint real quick. As you can see, this area here where the as-built enclosure occurred, there was a roof over that portion. It then had a 6-foot fence underneath that roof line. So historically, there has been a building since the 1930s that was assessed in 55 and 71 by the county tax assessor that has been there. So there has always been a structure there, and the hedge line has been there. So it's predominantly screened by the hedge, which that improvement to enclose it would not have an adverse impact on the visual openness of the public street frontage because it was already physically there. An accessory building on a single-family lot is an appropriate improvement for a single-family lot, and you need a modification in order to permit this in this particular location. So that is what the second part of your question was about.
Commissioner Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you want to sit down, Ms. Allen, I don't have anything
No, I
for you.
wanna
You
stand
answered
here.
all my questions. Thanks. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Ms. Riegel, so really the only, I'm going to get kicked under the table by Commissioner Lodge probably, but the only thing that concerns me is the discussion on the historical water conduit, or aqueduct. So you use two phrases, and you use as you were showing that blue stripe, and one is the historical location, and the other was the actual remnants. And from the site visit, the actual remnants are really just all you see right there at the front. It's a couple rocks in the ground. That's where I start getting kicked. But what is the point of running an easement all the way through the rest of the property if the remnants themselves are only in the first 10 feet?
The archaeologist could have spoken probably more clearly to this, but old records indicate that the Mission Aqueduct did cross the entire width of the parcel and then kind of went off into a southerly direction across the neighboring parcel. So the archaeologists, without doing a lot of digging, looking for any more remnants, just stated that this easement on 5 feet either side of the remaining remnant portion at the front of the property should be protected through the width of the parcel.
As far as we know, that historical location part is just dirt, right?
Currently, it does appear that it was removed some time ago, just from looking at the site, and maybe the applicants.
And we are living with hardscape improvements over the top of that anyhow, right?
Correct, that were done probably back in the 20s.
Okay. And so then, you raised two issues with the argument for that. And the other one was a spatial relationship between the garage and the house. And I'm just wondering if you could explain more to me about what issue there is on a spatial relationship that prevents the garage from moving back and also moving 3 feet back over to be no worse in the encroachment than it is right now.
I'm going to defer the spatial relationship to the historic consultant because it's spoken about in the Historic Structures and Sites report, how important that is from a historic perspective.
Okay.
Come on ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Thompson and Commissioner Higgins, or is Jordan? Sorry.
I'm
Tim
pretty sure these
Hazeltine
questions
from
are from
Post
Jay, not
Hazeltine
from me.
Associates. The report actually, there's a whole section on analyzing the relocation of the garage. And what's important about the spatial relationship is there is some distance between the house and the garage. So our concern was that the garage, not moving it back was appropriate, not appropriate, but wouldn't create a significant, substantial impact to the setting of the house or the streetscape, because the street presentation of that would remain the same. The garage would still face out towards the street, and the distance between the house and the garage would remain almost the same. It's changing by a little less than 2 feet on that side. So when we evaluated that, the streetscape would not be substantially impacted by that, and neither would the house, because the distance between the two buildings would remain essentially the same.
So the consideration there is more from a standpoint of it looks kind of the same, and that's a good thing, but not a measurement of 20 is good, 18 is bad.
It's not sort of like a science in that regard. So we don't have a table that we can consult.
This is where my brain is on the wrong side.
Okay.
So, yep.
And I'm not the archaeologist, but we did consult with David Stone, who wrote the report when we did prepare our report. And I just concur with what staff said, that the purpose of that easement, as David communicated to us, was there could be something there. They don't think there is, but in order to protect that potential location of the resource from disturbance.
Okay. And so when you're looking at that from standing in the middle of the street and you see the relationship, if you move the garage back, you see the relationship between the house, the space, the garage, and then there's also a relationship between the garage and the fence of the neighboring property.
Exactly.
And so you have also talked or discussed about how that changes the look of the streetscape by narrowing that alley between the garage and the 6 or 7 foot tall fence there?
Well, it's a masonry or it's a stucco-clad wall, but we thought that it's changing on either side. I think the entire increase in width is about 2 feet. So if you split the difference, it's about a foot on either side. So it was our judgment that moving the garage a foot closer to the boundary wall was not creating a substantial impact or raising the height of the roof approximately.
I think it's more like 2 feet 8 going to that direction.
Oh, pardon,
right?
you're right, correct,
Eagles,
yeah.
It's like,
so
I was
it
using
is
3
closer.
feet because
I'm sorry, it's
to 3
closer.
feet.
Yeah, you're correct. But we judged that distance was not that change wasn't so substantial that it was really impacting the relationship of the garage with the house or the relationship of the project parcel with the adjacent parcel, which have traditionally been historically separated by a fairly substantial wall.
But what you said just there didn't really address the view of the relationship between the garage and the dwindling width of the space between the garage and the fence. In other words, you had 7 feet, 6 feet, and now you're going to have 3 feet. And so you had a boulevard, and now you're going to have half of a boulevard. And so,
well, part of when we evaluate the setting of buildings, one of the things we look at is obviously the spatial relationship of the structures with boundary fences and walls, but also is there a historic landscape around the house? And in this case, with this house, there isn't. And I don't believe that moving it that number of feet is creating a substantial impact for the purposes of the review of our report. Is it creating an impact to the resource that's substantial and significant?
Okay.
And so that movement does not really reach the level of substantial and significant for the purposes of environmental review. Okay. But it does change it. But it is the change to the setting of the building, and it's by relocating it, making it wider, is analyzed in the report.
Okay.
So we did do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Campanella.
Thank you, Chair Thompson. Question for the applicant team. I'm a little confused on the wall setback to the neighbor, and I think I questioned that when we were on the site tour. As it currently, if we look at the slide do you have one with the current garage location on it? Yeah, that's it? Okay, you moved it forward.
Yeah.
Okay, currently there's a jog in that wall that goes closer to the property, to the west. But the exhibits that we have show as if the property line and the wall are all in a straight line. So I'm confused where the current existing wall that is on the side of the garage and jogs over about 3 feet. Is that within the neighbor's property? Is that on the property line? And how does that compare with the rest of the wall from the back of the garage on through the property?
I feel like asking a confirmation from the architect that prepared the plan. So I believe that this line is aligned with the existing wall. So you're correct, it's not depicted on this exhibit, and I'm, Mark?
Right. So I just want to be clear, when we're talking about existing condition and separation from the wall and the plan condition, that, you know, we're talking about the same, you have a visual separation, and also, then you also have a separation to the property line, and I'm trying to figure out what those distances are.
However, while they're looking up that information, bear in mind our requirement is to make findings to do with the distance to the garage from the setback, not what is on the ground there. The wall is built into the neighbor's property for whatever reason. That has nothing to do with the setback.
Right. I understand that, but we're giving examples on what the current condition is now by a measurement, and I don't know, and what it's going to become by a measurement when it pushes back. I don't know what it's being measured against.
Measured against the property line,
That's
because
what I'd like
that's
to
where
confirm.
the setback that we're making a finding about is encroachment into the setback.
Okay. Well, if they could just confirm that by the illustration, I'd be happy.
Thank you for your patience. May I will use the slide that's up there. So my apologies that the wall is not accurately depicted. So the jog does occur in this general area at the back of the existing garage, and it jogs over interior to the neighbor's property. So the wall that's depicted here is the existing wall, and that dimension right here is correct. But what happens here is the wall jogs over onto the neighbor's property and goes out to the front to the sidewalk.
Okay, and your existing, the existing contingent, existing exhibit on the location of the garage that shows the separation is to the property line,
It's to
not
the
to that existing wall.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you on that. And just to confirm some dimensions, if I can, the proposed garage height at its highest point is how many feet? Did you?
16 feet 8 inches.
Okay, 16 feet 8 inches.
Did we say the same thing?
And the residence itself, at its highest, let's say at the rear of the house, how high up is that, approximately? 30.
So because the way the city measures height, it changes depending on your point of reference. So if I'm standing at the back of the house, it just changes as the grade changes. So I believe it's 32 feet at its highest point.
Okay, so for discussion purposes, it's 32 feet, and the house is set back approximately, the rear of the house, the plate line, rear of the house is set back approximately 20 or 25 feet further than the new location of the garage. Is that correct?
Maybe if we can get a site plan, would you mind pointing to which dimension you want
I'm looking
confirmation?
at visually what one sees from the rear or side
I
or
understand.
neighbor, since we have a neighbor. So if you go to the rear of the house, the main residence,
Back here.
okay, the distance between that rear of the house, let's say, and the rear of the proposed garage,
Okay.
I'm just trying to
I'd have to
approximate
scale.
off that it's about 25 feet.
I'd have to scale it. I don't know it off the top
Yeah,
of my
I see the
head.
10-foot line, and I'm just approximating that it's about 25 feet. About 30 feet, okay.
30?
So the comparison of the two buildings after things are all completed is you have the garage is approximately 16 feet 8 inches. The building at the rear is about 32 feet, if you're looking at them together.
Okay.
And set back about 25 or 30 feet. So I'm just looking visually how they would look from the rear or from the neighboring property. if you were looking onto your lot.
I
Okay?
understand.
That just puts it in perspective for me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No other questions from the commission. I have one public speaker. I'll open up public testimony at this time. Kent Mixon.
I'm sure you don't want all my stuff.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Thompson and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity today. I'm here on behalf of the owner of the 332 Junipero Plaza project, and unfortunately she's not here today. I was actually the architect on that project a few years ago when it went through a pretty major rehabilitation. So I'm quite familiar with the area and quite familiar with the neighborhood and the two properties that we're talking about today. I did submit a letter to you guys on Monday. I'm not sure if you guys got that.
Yes, it was handed out.
Okay, great. So I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I just, what we really want to say today is that we are in favor of the project that the Winds have put forward and the much needed attention and improvements. But the one thing that we have an issue with is the garage. Because it is such a large structure. It has a large ridge, and its new location is going to be an impact, we believe, on both of these historic resources and historic structures. The Junipero Plaza project is a city landmark building. It's the De La Guerra Dibley residence. And as was stated today, this structure that we have before us is a historic or potential historic structure as well. So really our issue is with the size, mass, and really the roof line of the proposed garage. Since it is going to be still closer to the property line than what currently exists and slightly taller than what exists there today too is of a concern. And of a concern that we feel is probably has negative impacts on both properties, not only on the Winds, just because their structure, it's going to be adjacent to their existing residence, that they're going to be looking out on this. There's light, air, ventilation views from that house that I think will be impacted. But also from our property on the Junipero Plaza side, that is the rear yard, that is the pool terrace. And to look at the side of that roof structure is not, or less than appealing, I guess I should say. So I'm not sure that you guys really going to get into the aesthetics, and unfortunately we didn't. You have the opportunity to go to the HLC meeting. I'm sure that that's who will handle the aesthetics of the situation. But we just ask that, if it does get improved into the setback as it's proposed, that we ask that some conditions be placed on it that would potentially modify that roof line or lower that roof line in relationship to this property line. We certainly understand the reasoning behind its location for the aqueduct speculation and all of those reasons, and the need for safety and for parking the cars off street. That's all appreciated. We're just hoping that some consideration is made.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else want to speak about this item? Okay, we'll close public testimony and it's back to the commission for comments. Commissioner Jordan?
Just, I guess, brings up another question. I'd like to invite the historical guy back up again. Tim, thank you. So,
Welcome back, historical guy.
Thank you.
Mr. Hazeltine. So obviously this wasn't discussed at HLC, but I'm just interested in what your take is on that comment of the relationship between how the house and the garage look now, the certain style and design it is now, the aesthetics, and an attempt to, if you move the garage over closer and encroach more into the setback to the neighboring property, if that same look and feel from your perspective could be designed while dropping the pitch height of the garage.
In regards to the height, the ridge line of the garage, my understanding is it's going up about 8 inches. So dropping it below the historic configuration of the roof, which is the way it was designed to emulate the design features of the house, which is American colonial revival style. So that sort of Dutch gambrel roof is a feature of that particular style of period revival architecture. So dropping the roof line lower than its historic height would actually impact the integrity of the garage as a historic resource, which contributes to the setting and history of the house, which is
that's what's driving that height up right now is just an increase in the length of the width of the garage.
In order to accommodate the additional width, the pitch has to be somewhat taller.
So you would maintain that there's no way to have the same design and be true to that relationship while lowering the height with the same design? I mean, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying.
No, you're not oversimplifying it, actually. It's a good question. But it's a Dutch gambrel roof, and you can see on the illustration on the screen, Dutch gambrel has a sort of broken pitch and comes down more steeply from the gable element. And lowering that would essentially make it less like the historic garage. So it wouldn't really be a true Dutch gambrel. I mean, hypothetically, maybe you could lower it another 6 inches. But what I'm saying is it's once you start playing with the proportions of the building too much, it really diminishes its integrity as an example of its particular architectural type. And also, one of our goals, and it was something that HLC concurred with, was that when they rebuild the garage, they're going to use the original materials to the maximum extent feasible, including windows and siding and trim work. And so our goal, one of our goals, and also the applicants, is to keep the garage as far as its overall configuration and height as close as structurally feasible with the original, so as much of the original material can be reused, rather than having just a complete recreation.
So you're calling this a Dutch what?
Yeah, Dutch gambrel roof.
So, and that typically is always the same pitch, or the pitch just matches a pitch that's on the front of the house?
It matches a pitch, and it's the historic pitch, you could say. This is what the architect chose, or the architectural designer. So they're increasing it by 6 inches, but that's not really changing the proportions. But if you dropped it a few feet, it wouldn't be a Dutch gambrel roof. And actually, you couldn't achieve a Dutch gambrel if the front gable element at the top was a lot lower. It would look...
By definition? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, it can't be too... I guess you could say the pitch can't be too shallow.
Okay.
It wouldn't really be a Dutch gambrel then.
Okay.
And regarding the spatial relationship of this garage with the adjoining property, normally, unless there's a historic landscape that we're evaluating that this contributes to, we don't usually look at the relationship of one house to another unless the proposed project is of such a scale that it's actually introducing something that's remarkably larger in scale, bulk, and massing. And in this case, the garage will be a little bigger, and it will be 6 inches taller. But we did not judge that to be such a substantial increase that we needed to evaluate that 6-inch increase in height against the adjoining house, which is 1 story in height, and actually not really very visible, from the subject property or the street. As you can see in, I think, some of the photographs that were shown earlier. It's the Daligara Dibley house does not present itself from that particular streetscape as was intended by the architect. That's why it's a 1-story design with a masonry wall along East Los Olivos Street. They wanted to create a sense of enclosure, and it doesn't present itself on that side. It's really the Junipero Plaza side of the property that is the most substantial in terms of its public presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hazelton, my questions are...
Sure.
Sorry about that. My questions are exactly along the line of what Mr. Jordan was asking about. Would it change the proportions of the building itself in a way to affect the historicity of the building by lowering the walls, leaving the proportions of the roof, the Dutch gambrel roof, exactly as they are, but allowing.
So lowering the plate height.
Lowering the plate height, yes. Say if you were to lower it a foot, so the whole thing's being taken apart anyway. So you.
Yes.
I'm
not
would
sure
that work?
How would that work? I am not an architect, so I can't weigh in on if that's feasible. But
I'm wondering about
one is
as
the
a historic
proportions.
resource.
Historically, it may not work. As Trish was just whispering to me to remind me, there is historic fenestration on the side elevations, not the back, which was altered by the Dole family who owned it in the 50s through this.
Yeah, and it seems.
But
totally
the double hung sash, I believe, there, multi lights on the side, are original, as is the classical style dental molding. And so by pushing everything down, it would change the proportions substantially. We had a fairly lengthy analysis in the report for the change, and it was a discussion item at the Landmarks Commission, and we did talk about that and answer questions from the commissioners. So that was a concern of theirs, but they ultimately judged that change was, they concurred with the report that those changes were not substantial and that this was the best design, and this not best, but it would work. It would preserve the historic character of the building while allowing it to be wide enough to actually park 2 cars in, which now it sort of meets that standard, but it's so narrow that to modern cars.
I understand that. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, but changing the proportions of the plate height would actually make the roof look so much larger in relation to the overall proportions of the wall itself. So the roof would be on the side elevations would become somewhat overwhelming, and it might start giving it the appearance of something like a Moody Sister Cottage, where the proportions are sort of unique and picturesque, but not American colonial revival.
Okay, I guess what I'm thinking about, of course, is the De La Guerra Dibley House, which is such a distinguished building, and looking from there, I'm just was trying to minimize the impact of the garage moved into the new location.
I did see the letter and the images that were appended to it, and currently their view is obviously some landscaping and then the side of the house. So we'll change that because they will be seeing the side of the garage, but that view from the side elevation of the adjoining house, I would hazard to guess, would not be considered historic for the purposes of environmental review. For our review, the view out of that house towards the Dole house is not part of a historic landscape feature or a historic vista that would meet the sort of the definition of a historic landscape or perspective. Like there are some places in the city where a view towards a certain landmark or natural feature is important to retain.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Higgins.
Mr. Chair, are we on to comments?
Yeah, if there are no more questions, we'll go to comments. Commissioner Higgins.
So thank you. I understand the relocation of the garage. You've got some, I would say, gentle arguments as to why it needs to remain in line with the current garage, close to the property line, in terms of the arc, we'll call it an easement, and the distance between the house and the garage, and that the garage has to be visibly subordinate to the house. So I'm okay with that, and I can appreciate the safety aspect. I'm going to look up your turntable, your vehicle turntable installer, and try to get one of those for my wife too. So these narrow streets in San Roque are a pain. But it will probably most likely improve safety for the people that are coming in and out of the property, and I think it's an architectural improvement as well, just from the streetscape to see less garages on the street. So I can support that. And in terms of the accessory structure on the other side of the property, I get it. It's effectively has been there, whether or not it was enclosed. So I'm okay with that analysis as provided by staff. And ready to support the project.
Thank you. Commissioner Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have no problem with the front setback discussion and no problem with the far mod discussion, the 2 out of the 3. I'm most concerned about the interior setback for the garage, obviously, from my questions. And I guess I don't know. I'm a little nonplussed that we're talking about some dirt running through a whole property. I think I'm a little ignorant in this area. Obviously, I get the front part of the property where I can see the remnants. I don't get the back part of the property where I only see dirt, and why that gracious consideration by the applicant is driving the garage further into the encroachment when we have a situation where we get to build the garage pretty much wherever we want to build it. We're going to knock the thing down and rebuild the thing. So I'm sympathetic to the neighbor. I don't think we should necessarily be giving out encroachment modifications just for no good reason at all. And I think what you're going to end up finding up here is everybody's going to say this is a good reason, and I think I'll go along with them. I am so far lost in this conversation of historical relevance. I look at the things a little different. I look at the pushback of the garage as a great improvement to the streetscape. All the examples that Ms. Allen showed of the other encroachments are horrible intrusions right up on the sidewalk in the street, and this will help improve, in my view, what the streetscape looks like. It will bring, I think, an erosion of my enjoyment of that by watching that narrow corridor be shrunk next to a really high wall at the neighbor, to where you end up with basically just this little dark alley of a way down that right side of the garage. I wish there was a better ending to Commissioner Large's questions about other ways to get that 8 inches or foot or 2 feet back down in the design. I understand the answers to the question. I don't think per se the garage is excessively high. If you moved it back over 4 or 5 feet, you could have a 30-foot structure there. So I think it's not the height necessarily. It's just the intrusion into that safety space between two properties. I think I obviously can support the front and the far mod. I think if the commission's going to go as a majority with the interior setback mod, I'll also support that too. I get the neighbor's argument, but I see some benefits in the improvements that are being made on the property, and I'll be able to make the findings if that's the way the majority of the commission wants to go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with the bottom line for me. I am going to be able to make the findings under the required applications for the setback modifications and the net floor area ratio, and I'd like to make a few comments about this. It's always challenging in an old city like Santa Barbara, where we have some very old, and in this case prominent, structures. And over many decades, our zoning laws have changed, properties have been subdivided, new structures, permitted and unpermitted, have been placed on the real estate. And so we're looking, and we often are faced with this, in an imperfect set of considerations and decisions. So I think that sort of an overlay of reasonableness and practicality needs to be applied here. Now, when it comes to historic resources, Santa Barbara's iconic reputation and our visual aesthetic is often tied to our historic resource aesthetic. In this case, however, I think I'm less eager to make findings that revolve around a remnant of a historic resource that is not available for public viewing or a public experience. The other thing I was going to ask Mr. Hazeltine is about the professional industry consideration or interpretation of a remnant being so altered. First of all, it's a remnant. Secondly, it's been altered by time and nature, and now there's dirt overlaying the remnant. And I'm just wondering what's truly historic as from your professional. Yes, would you please come up for that? what's truly considered historic? I've dealt with this in a number of other venues, and sometimes I hear from historians such as yourself, known local professionals, that we actually can't find much of any historic integrity to consider it historic. So I would appreciate...
I presume, Commissioner Schwartz, you're talking about the aqueduct?
Yes.
Well, we're not archaeologists. I'd like to preface my remarks by that, but we can consider it, as we did in our report, as it's an archaeological resource, but it's also a historic resource because it's it's a physical element dating to the European period in Santa Barbara's history. So it is a structure, too, that's visible. I will note that you could see more of it as recently as the early 90s when I assisted in the National Landmark Study of Mission Santa Barbara. And in the interim since then, until the present owners have acquired the property recently and actually started cutting back on overgrown vegetation and such, you could, as you walked along East Los Olivos Street, you could look over the hedging fence material and you could see the aqueduct fragment, which at that time was surrounded by a little bit of lawn, and you could see that the owners were keeping it up. Mm-hmm. As far as its importance, one should consider it not in isolation as a fragment, but as part of a larger constellation of features and resources that actually extend up into Mission Canyon and Rattlesnake Canyon, built mostly during the early 19th century, and was one of the most extensive waterworks systems in Spanish North America. And of course, over the years, as settlement has changed in the Santa Barbara area, many elements of it have been lost. And as recently as the late 1950s, there were extensive visible elements in Mission Canyon and Rattlesnake Canyon. There are fewer now. There are some up near Marymount, but the loss of part of that resource, makes the surviving elements much more important because they are the survivors and they do tell a great deal about the history of this community, and perhaps very relevant now too as we're going through our own water crisis. And it was the Spanish ingenuity and the work of the Chumash who created this system, and it is really the start of Santa Barbara as a big settled community. The ability to take water from what then was considered a pretty far distance from Rattlesnake and Mission Canyon, bring it down to the Mission, and use it for a variety of uses, including industry in terms of pottery and tanning, water for irrigation, water for drinking. So it was kind of a remarkable system for the early 19th century. So I think every element of it that survives has importance, even if we can't see them.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move on from this, the remnant of the historic aqueduct, and say that I think there are, for all the practical reasons, the following improvements: functionality, accessibility, and safety. It's appropriate to deconstruct and reconstruct this garage farther away from the street. Times are very different now in Los Olivos than certainly when this house was originally built, let alone even a few decades after that. So I think that for modern times and also modern zoning requirements, I think that's appropriate. I think the unfortunate part of the constrained area on the lot then, given what we've now just talked about, is the proximity to the neighbor. I want to, speaking of that, the documents that Mr. Mixon sent us, when I look at the photographs of the view shed, this is exhibits 2 and 3 as attachments to Mr. Mixon's letter to us. And just keeping in mind that the Planning Commission does not have purview over private view sheds, but nonetheless, sort of good neighbor policies and practices in mind. Quite frankly, Mr. Mixon, I don't see a significant change in the view that, I don't know if it's your client or who you're representing, will have, as opposed to the side of the house, you'll be seeing the garage. So it's the side of something. It's not unimpeded views of the San Ynez Mountains or anything else that's an important public view shed or public resource. So I'm not quite as sympathetic to the concern about the view from the neighboring property, given what this photo describes to me. Let me see if there's one final comment here about that. I think overall this is an opportunity with this new property owner to make some very important changes. Yes, we're bringing some legal matters up to code, which is, I think, an outstanding opportunity. And lastly, in terms of the charts that staff has provided in the way of the neighboring properties ranked by FAR, total square feet, percentage of maximum FAR, and lot size, we know that in this area of Santa Barbara, especially going back to the early few decades of the 1900s, very large residential structures were constructed, and this in many ways defines this neighborhood, the Upper East. And so that properties were subdivided, some things have changed, I think nonetheless puts us in a current sort of contemporary realistic reality, which is that we have larger homes on smaller lots now. And I think there's no way around it. We just have to be reasonable in terms of making improvements. And I think that's what's being proposed. So I am going to support, again, all of staff's requested and required applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make a comment first and ask Mr. Hazeltine to tell me if I'm incorrect. As the Presidio was being reconstructed, they discovered aqueduct that was totally covered up. Nobody knew it was there. And it goes all the way up to, did it connect with this particular part, or?
You may be an archaeologist yet before this day's over.
Well, actually, I started out in archaeology, but that was a long time ago. Commissioner Lodge, I don't remember how much they were able to, of that line from the Presidio they were able actually to find, but I know that Mike Immerly worked on it, the staff archaeologist for the Trust for Historic Preservation, and I think they did find a fairly substantial element of it. And I think your point is that sometimes they are found, and I'm sure that, David Stone, the archaeologist, his reasoning as outlined in his report was that this was a way of protecting the potential location of this resource should it be there. And better to perhaps avoid it than to develop a plan to build over where it might be. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would like to move to concur with the staff recommendation and make the findings to approve the front setback modifications, interior setback modification, and the FAR modification, and adopt the revised conditions.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? I know. We have a motion that we have to... Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Now discussion. Commissioner Campanella.
Sure. Thank you. A question I have in my own mind, it's a balancing act, I guess, and I think the balance in my mind has to go to the historical nature of the street and the two properties, and rely on landmarks and our consultant to try to keep things in perspective, and also the neighbors to work in perspective that these are both historical structures. So I need to rely on the setbacks okay, the distance is okay, the design is okay. If we were just pushing back a one-car garage, I wouldn't have as much as the dilemma in trying to come up with a decision. I think, hopefully, this is just in my opinion, Landmarks comes up with some type of detailing on that front door of the garage. I don't know if a two-car wide garage door is really historical in nature as opposed to the one-car garages we see from that period. And I know you're probably not wide enough to do two separate doors because you only have a 20-foot span. You probably need 22 or so to do two doors. So hopefully the detailing works out a little better on that garage door. Hopefully I'm not off base making that comment. But so I think I have to go to the consultants that keep both properties in context. I think the The distance from, even in its new location, the distance of the garage to the neighboring residence is sufficient. Is a sufficient distance. It's also screened by a number of trees, Italian cypress, et cetera, that appear to be there that screens it. So I think on balance, I have to go with the historical in perspective, but also the safety feature. And getting parking off the street, getting two cars, doing a turnaround, and providing that for an owner who's going to put a lot of investment in this property and make his ingress and egress with cars safer, I think I would lean in the interior setback modification to have them accomplish that while balancing everything. As far as the other modification requests, I'm also in agreement with those, and I'll be voting to approve the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd briefly say that I support the setback and FAR modification request. As regards the garage issue vis-a-vis the neighbor, I would suggest maybe to Mr. Mixon that his client might want to avail himself of the newly revised wall and hedge ordinance, because hedges are now allowed to go a lot higher than they used to, and that might help to soften the view of the garage from their backyard. So that might be an avenue you might want to pursue. Are there any other comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it's approved, and this is appealable within 10 calendar days. Next item on the agenda is the construction update for Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. There's no formal action to be taken. This is just an informational item for the Planning Commission. Ms. Galarte, are you going to give the report?
Ms. Riggle will be giving the
Ms.
report.
Riggle will do the honors again.
Good afternoon again. Cottage Hospital is now in phase 5 of their construction. This is a vicinity map that we have used at our past reviews, just showing where the overall campus is of the Cottage Hospital. It is in 3 separate areas. I do have the condition, which does clearly state that we need to return each year with an annual construction update and through 3 years following the certificate of occupancy. So we've probably got another 6 to 8 annual reports to go. The focus of Phase 5 and Phase 6 construction is in the area outlined with the yellow square on the screen, with north being oriented to the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Phase 5 is now 95% complete. In your staff report, I believe it said that it was 60% complete, but I did get an update from the project applicant that they are now 95% complete. Phase 5 consisted of the demolition of buildings A, B, C, and F, completion of the link building, reskinning the east wing, and constructing vaults for emergency underground storage of water. This is a picture from April this year. I happened to be in the area when they were doing some demolition, so I just thought it was interesting. This is about the time they were 60% complete. Issues that were discussed in the staff report were about traffic and parking. We did receive one complaint that a subcontractor was parking within the neighborhood. Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, as well as their facilities manager, do monitor the parking in the neighborhood, and they did alert that contractor that they needed to be parking off-site. There are 4 neighborhood meetings that were held during the calendar year of 2014. And I did talk to the schedule, and I have some following slides about the schedule, tree maintenance, and solid waste reduction. So future phases are Phase 6, which constructs the diagnostic and treatment extension, the new patient pavilion, and some remodel. And then Phase 8 is the final phase of the project, which would remodel and is mostly interior, the buildings D, E, G, and K, and the corner at Pueblo and Bath. During Phase 5 construction, they did have to remove this Canary Island pine due to a State Office of Public Health Department request. They needed to construct a better exit from the existing building. With that, it narrowed the planter width where that tree is planted, and it caused some stability issues. So as a part of that approval, ABR reviewed a revised landscape plan and some tree mitigation for upsizing some existing trees or proposed trees, as well as some street trees. The Morton Bay fig was limbed up prior to the demolition and construction of Phase 6. It has showed some new growth and is doing very well. In your staff report, the solid waste section of the report stated that they did not meet the city's goal of diversion from the city, from Tahigas landfill, but it was found out after the staff report was prepared that they didn't have complete information at that time. So the information that I passed out to you was some pie charts for 2014 calendar year, which shows that 87% was diverted from the landfill and 13% was sent to the landfill, which did meet the city's objective of 70% diversion. The project as a whole, since construction began, has diverted 93% of the tonnage from the landfill. With that, this is just an image that we've used in the past to turn it over to Ron Biscaro so he can give you additional details about the construction.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Thompson and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Ron Biscaro. I'm the Vice President for Project Management for Cottage Health, and I'm pleased to provide a brief update to segue on to Suzanne Riegel's update on Cottage. And let's get going. As she said, we're in Phase 5. The project was projected to be about 3.5 years from duration after we finished Phase 4 and occupied that in February of 2012. It's about 30 days behind schedule. Very complex project. Mr. Thompson, our project director, is here. In case any questions come up on that phase, we've had a really good focus on this phase. We've done it through a multi-prime contract arrangement. It's about a $45 million phase of our work. The Link building was occupied last year, as well as a lot of other remodel projects in the hospital. And then prior to that, we had demolished the North Wing, which is Building F, and a couple of photos that you've already seen. I'll send a few photos here in a moment. We've got buildings A, B, and C now pretty much gone, and we are projecting to complete demolition in the next few weeks and then begin the grading process for the beginning of Phase 6, which is our final new project phase for Cottage, late August and early September. So we're heading to the finish line finally. Again, what we did in summary, built the Link building there between Centennial and the East Wing. That's the only point of connection, if you will, between the existing buildings and the new buildings that were built in Phase 4. It's about a 110-yard thoroughfare that is much traveled by all our staff back and forth. We put OSHPOD required for our SPC4, NPC4 requirements, 2 underground water tanks here next to the Link building. And actually, we exceeded the requirements. We went for a 96-hour supply of water versus 72 to make sure we had even more than we were required to do. So that went very well as well. So the site is now pretty much open. Our overall schedule here from the beginning of Phase 5 has kind of evolved to a point we are at today in June, and we're very close to completion of this phase, but it won't finally complete till the exterior skin is put on the south wing, which is probably about November. So concurrent with the extension of Phase 5 will be the beginning of Phase 6. So let me just give you the video we've shown before, which kind of takes you through the evolution of the last 3 or 4 years. And we zero in here on the hospital as it existed about 3 years ago. There's the Energy Center there at the corner of Bath and Junipero. You'll see the preparation for the Fleischmann Wing or North Wing demolition that occurred about 2 years ago. Very assuring that had to occur before that was torn down. A very difficult demolition, took about 8 months. Again, the recycling about almost 95%. Here we see the water tanks, and then subsequently we build the Link building across, and so that kind of got completed at the end of last year. So for the last 7 or 8 months, we've been preparing for the demolition of the other buildings. You see the reskinning of the wall. And while we were doing that, we were dealing with all the low voltage and all the MEP caps and tie-ins for the new and the old. So swinging around here, we prepared for the Reeves Demolition. That was the first one to go, followed by actually Building A, which was behind it, and then the central wing was last, just because of the way the logistics worked out. A and B came down at the same time, and you saw the shoring going in for the fig tree. That's actually happening right now. Skinning of the exterior wall will happen the last 3 months of this year, and then lo and behold, we build phase 6. We project a schedule now of about 33 months. Looking back at phase 4, that took 47 months. So, and I'll tell you why that will be so less time in a moment. So that's what we'll look like here in 2018. Let me show you here another video for the last year. Let me see if it hopefully comes up. Oh, a couple of photos first. Let me, a couple of photos. This is what exists today on the site. So we are still working through the final phase of demolition and bringing all that dirt around. It's been a very phased process, and we've had a really good collaborative relationship with Standard Industries, our demolition contractor and recycler. And here you can see specifically the Moreton Bay Fig. We've taken great pains to make sure it thrives, or it has thrived in the last 10 years. And we've got those big shoring piles you see to the right. So we're shoring it to make sure, as we sort of do the shoring and lagging, when we actually go dig the hole deeper and build phase 6, it's not damaged. So that's gone quite well. We're going to show you a video here. It's sped up at times. Over the last year, what we've done in order to get more certainty on the schedule, predictability, and reduce their exposure from subcontractor claims in the future as well, and just have a really better, more fluid project. Tom and his team for Cottage worked closely with McCarthy Construction, who was our energy center builder. They built our parking structures. They are going to build phase 6 for us. So we have a kind of a 10-year partnership with McCarthy. And we've got a hand-picked team. We've been working on design assist, basically developing the model, building the model of the new hospital in 3D. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like here. And you've got a little flyover here. So this has occurred over the last year. We've actually modeled every piece of steel and every connection. Got the footings all modeled in, all the undergrounds modeled in, and we're kind of flying through the one of the secondary entrances here through the patient units. We're going very quickly, but just to give you a sense of the level of detail, what we've tried to do here is obviate questions coming up during the project. So we've had literally 2,500 requests for information, RFIs, that have come up pre-construction in the last 12 months, and culminating in this model, which culminated this week in our bid for the project. And so we now have our bid, and we will develop our project cost and present that to the board of directors in July and issue a notice to proceed, I would say the second week of August, to McCarthy to begin construction in late August and early September. And so our steel is in fabrication for the hospital already, and we now know basically pretty much with every detail what we're expecting. So some of the key subcontractors will actually manufacture and pre-cut ducting and conduit and pipe off-site, and you can see all these points of connection in the ceiling here as we kind of fly quickly through the structural steel and all the various devices that are hung here, including sprinkler pipe, etc., onto the steel and the various slab on metal deck that we'll be building. So again, a lot of predictability. It gives us an opportunity to actually create less impact in our neighborhood and our community by getting the project done quicker and more risk-free actually to the system. So we've learned a lot. Although we did this in phase 4 back in 2007, the technological sophistication of the modeling is way beyond where it was. And so yes, it's taken a good investment of time and money, but I think it's been well spent. And when we hit the project hard, it'll go very, very well. Again, the recycling, I won't bother going through the detail here, but I think As Suzanne said, we had a little error the first time we submitted that, but we are doing very, very well over the past year. And on a cumulative basis, we've recycled about 93%. And all the concrete that has been recycled has gone to Santa Paula down in the Ventura County area. We couldn't find a recycling place here in the community anywhere with the volume that we had. So it's caused us about a $500,000 premium to make sure that we sent the concrete down and brought it back. So we're almost done, and the base for Phase 6 essentially will be the recycled concrete from all the hospital that we've demolished. But it's been at a premium for us, but I think our commitment was very staunch, and we have upheld that. So we do have neighborhood meetings, as was indicated. We've had 4 beyond the requirements. We were required to have 2. We've had very few issues with helipad stuff. We continue to have a fair amount of helipad traffic, just might as well say it, 5 to 6 per week. And that more than expected a few years ago, but I think we've got the quieter helicopters going. We've had very, very few complaints since the time we opened the hospital, which generated a lot of community angst for a while back in 12 and 13. But senior management, Mr. Fellows in particular, I think dealt with each one of those issues. And I think it's quelled considerably, and we have very few issues that come. And certainly from our project cost, from a project flow standpoint, Phase 5 has had very few issues. 3 or 4 people attend our neighborhood meetings, and we give them a similar update to what we're doing here to you as the Planning Commission. So I welcome any questions you might have, and proud to continue our commitment to the city and to the neighbors and to our community, really, to build a wonderful hospital that is probably 3 years away from completion. So I would say the middle part of 2018 is when we project to be done at this point. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Might as well stick around because I'm sure there's going to be a couple of questions.
You bet.
Commissioner Campanella.
Happy to oblige.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome.
Question for you. This really great recycling. I had a question. I think if I go back to one of the other briefings we had on some of the tear down, there was asbestos removal that you had to contend with.
Right.
And I was wondering, one, if that one is expected or that slowed up your schedule a bit. And secondly, whether, I know it doesn't weigh a lot, but if it's in contact or part of other material, does that material have to be disposed rather than it might be better to dispose of it than go through a cleanup operation, which would have reduced your tonnage recycled? That's 2 questions.
Yeah, 2 questions. Well, the asbestos is always more than expected in terms of the hospitals and their age. Pardon me, both these, the 3 buildings were different age buildings. One was back in the 20s, the Fleischmann Wing. We had a fair amount in there. And then the buildings that were demolished were from the 60s and 70s and sometimes the 80s. So the 80s buildings are pretty clean. But we probably had 3 times more asbestos content, well in excess of $1 million of mitigation costs, not dissimilar to what we had at St. Francis before we did Bella Riviera with the old buildings that were built in 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so when we encountered asbestos, like in waterproofing, we have to kind of take it apart and bag it. And separate that totally from any other demolition material. So our Standard Industries folks have a subsidiary arm that specializes in asbestos mitigation and all kinds of other, hazardous material mitigation, and everything is done, through the right procedures and policies. And on the schedule, I don't think it really hampered the schedule. We expected it. And some of the demolition occurred concurrent in other parts of the building as we were doing asbestos mitigation in other parts of the building. So it was kind of contemplated from the beginning, and I'd say the 30-day delay from the beginning of Phase 5 to where we project to end here in November is just the vagaries of the process and getting questions answered by OSHPD. It's actually about as fluid a job as we could have done, given our past experience with other similar projects in the past. So I think it's been well handled, as it has in the past, and I don't really think it's had an impact on the schedule. Yeah, you're welcome.
Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was pleased to see all the reporting on the great care that's been taken of the Martin Bay fig. And I was wondering in the shot where you see it with the building down now that it's been removed, and you can see that the tree has grown away from the building. And I was wondering if there was going to be any more, is the footprint going to be the same for the new part, or will there be a little more space for the tree?
Well, there's some built-in space for the tree, and the roots actually go well beyond that footprint that you see there. We're shoring as best as we can to protect the tree relative to the various excavations that we'll be doing here for Phase 6. We're not putting a basement on this side close to Morton Bay. We're putting the basement on the other side as part of the Centennial expansion. So regardless of what we do, there'll still be root issues for many, many years, because we've had roots that have kind of extended into the street. They've extended over to the Cancer Center entrance, and it's a pretty healthy tree. And we have the arborists come and the specialists come pretty much every year, I think. Tom, is it annually? Oh, yes. At least annually, and as Suzanne said, it was trimmed just before. So I think we've got it bonded. I think it's a landmark tree. We have taken great care, and probably it's costing us a lot more to protect it than it is for the tree itself, but we have great respect for it, and that's our goal. So,
And then I know the building had to be designed to withstand a severe earthquake.
Correct.
And I was curious, and perhaps you can't answer this question, but I was curious, and especially looking at the modelings that showed all the steel in it. Is there twice as much, 3 times as much as there would be in a building that was not a hospital?
Well, generally, OSHPD requires our buildings now in California to be at a structural performance category 4 or 5, which is the highest level of structural performance category. So it's an engineering calculation. Basically, it's a structural assessment. So it should withstand a 7.0 earthquake and still be functional. So it's not just, the buildings we have now, some of them are SPC2, which have been retrofitted through the OSHPD HAZUS program. And they may be more damaged in the event of an earthquake, but they should still stand. So there's various levels of building, but the ones we're building to comply with Senate Bill 1953 or SPC4, as all the buildings in California are, if you're going to achieve that compliance, and it should be 7.0 earthquake and above. Now, it probably would be even better, but we have to run a hospital, so unless we have an 8.0 or a 9 earthquake, I think these buildings will be fine based on the fact that the state has set the guidelines, and so we were building what's required.
Well, I'm sure it will. I was just wondering how much more had to be put into this building compared to but perhaps this is not a question, compared to an office building or something like that.
Yeah, I think the buildings that we're tearing down are basically concrete buildings with some rebar reinforcement. These are steel frame, brace frame buildings, with plaster around it. So these are structurally different. We're building a medical office building in Goleta. We could have easily built that to a lesser standard. It could have been a wood frame building, but we went steel on there too. If you look at the corner of Patterson and Hollister, it's a very beefy building, but it's not OSHPD requirement to do that. The Goleta Valley Cottage Hospital is built the same way this one is here, kind of to withstand a 7.0, and the steel levels are such that it's really a question of how you load the building. If it's 1-story, 2-story, 3-story, it's just the more you load it, the bigger your steel. And because we have a 60-foot height limitation, the steel doesn't have to be as big as it could be if it were a 6-story or a 7 or 8-story building. So,
thank you.
But way more than your commercial buildings here in town, by far. So,
Thank you. Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice to see you again, Mr. Viscaro.
Thanks, Deborah.
2 questions for you. Yep. The underground emergency water tanks that says in the staff report became fully operational in December of last year.
Yes.
And that you identified visually. Yes. They're truly just for emergency purposes. You don't tap that water and then refill it for any ongoing need?
Right, it's a continuous flow, so that it's always flowing through, but they're always topped off, essentially. So the water doesn't, it's a reservoir. So, but the water continues to flow through, but the reservoir they're basically big tanks, and they're always full.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my second question is tied to the parking management plan that was originally agreed to, and we've had some exchanges about that in past years, and I am pleased to see that there was only one complaint from the neighborhood, but I was wondering if you still have in place the construction workers parking plan we're utilizing one or more local church parking lots so that it's not adversely impacting the neighborhood. Can you
Well,
give me an update about that?
Sure. Most of the stuff we've been doing is very, very small construction, and a lot of the people that are working here are actually parking on site during this demolition process because there's not too many construction workers during Phase 5.
Okay.
In Phase 6, we have McCarthy doing the project, and they've already made an arrangement with La Cumbra Mall for off-site parking. As they had done previously with some of the local churches. I think they had Church of Latter-day Saints, and they also had, if I remember correctly, the Presbyterian Church. They had two sources of parking last time. So in the big contractor mode, which is coming, where we may have as many as 250 to 300 workers at the peak, that will be a shuttle in from La Cumbra. And I think that worked fairly well last time. And we do police it. The contractor does police it. There are fines in place. You know, we've just agreed on our agreement with McCarthy here this past week, Tom and I, and the fines are there as they were before. They're slightly modified, but I think we do have enforcement and we do have oversight both by the contractor and project management. So it's worked pretty well.
Great. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. And I'll open the meeting for public testimony at this point. We don't have any speaker slips, I don't believe, and I don't see anybody coming forward, so we'll close public testimony. Are there any final comments for staff or Mr. Biscaro or his team? If okay, Commissioner Schwartz.
Yes, thank you. I do want to express my compliments. You know, we've seen the arc of all of these phases with you and the difficulty in the depth and breadth of work that's needed. So I once again want to commend your organization for its very difficult task of accomplishing a significant undertaking embedded in a residential, primarily residential neighborhood, been responsive to some ongoing concerns from the neighbors. And I'm pleased that there's a light, you know, through the next couple of phases here at completion. You're a very important, obviously critical resource for our community. So thank you for everything.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your compliment.
I too want to commend you for the job you've been doing there. It's a huge, huge undertaking, and to keep a hospital functioning while you're doing this, not to mention the impact around the neighbors that you've managed to keep a lid on, but to keep a hospital functioning while you're doing a reconstruction project of this magnitude is amazing.
Thank you.
So
Well,
you guys are doing a great job.
There's been lots of noise, and we've had a huge impact the last 6 months on our own staff. It's been tough on staff and patients within Cottage because when you start to take out footings, the whole place rumbles, no matter how it's constructed. So it's been a bit of a burden, but we're almost through it, and appreciate your fine comments, and we'll look forward to coming back here next summer.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the last item on our agenda is administrative items. Staff hearing officer report. Do we have anything? Nothing to report. Any other committee reports? Commissioner Lodge?
The Historic Landmarks Commission, as always, had some potential historic resources that have had a study done to determine they should be considered for some sort of historic status in the city. And I think there were 5 of them on this last agenda. The city is rich in historic resources. So that was most of what the HLC did at their last meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Campanella.
Thank you. This past Monday, there was a meeting of the Special Sustainability Council Committee meeting, and that's comprised of council members Rouse White and Mayor Schneider. There was a UCSB intern that works with the mayor, prepared an analysis of the City of Santa Barbara's climate preparedness and resilience programs in comparison to the President of the U.S. has task force recommendations on adapting to climate change. And we're going to be seeing this sometime before September. It was in draft form, but it really went through all aspects of building. What are we doing about building resilient communities, our infrastructure, natural resources, human health, hazard mitigation, and understanding and acting on the economics of resilience. And each one of these topics pointed to exactly studies that we are either have prepared, action plans, and that is currently part of our infrastructure, if you will. And I thought it was a real good way for the public to see all the work that's been done by the city. So I think there'll be a coordination coming in, perhaps either at the September meeting, we'll see this, or maybe sometime before we'll get a briefing on it. It's a really great effort to see what we have already in place in that regard. So thank you.
Okay. Any other committee reports? Seeing none, then we're adjourned, and I guess we're adjourned to the special meeting on the next Thursday. Thank you.